So as I was saying, there's quite a few young people who are autistic and may have never received much support to understand their autistic identity, whereas parents might have had some support, school might have had support. And we know that for young people, having a positive understanding of autism and what that means to themselves is an indicator for positive self-esteem and well-being as an adult. So it's really important that we can kind of offer this. But obviously there's so many young people in Sutton who are autistic that I can't go around and speak to every single one of those children. So what we've done is put together a package of training that's free for schools. Originally it's via the ELSA support. So if you've got an ELSA in your school, emotional literacy support assistant, they will have been offered this training. So that's something for you to do, is to check whether they they're aware of it. If you don't have an ELSA, you can send somebody else. So you could come along, or somebody else within your school if you've got a teaching assistant. They could attend this training as well. And you can send, if you've got an ELSA going but you'd like to go as well, that's fine as well, if you just let me know. But I thought I'd just kind of run through a very brief sort of overview of the training, just so that you're aware of it, because the idea is that within schools, if you've got a young person where you think, oh, they might be struggling in whatever area, it's always useful to ask, do they actually know about their autistic diagnosis or identity? Because so often they don't, and that can make a big difference. And then look at whether the ELSA can offer some support within school. And we are going to offer ongoing support as well. So if you have an ELSA that does the training and they start to try and do the sessions and they're kind of struggling with it, or not quite sure how to problem solve a certain situation, we're going to have regular drop-in sessions, and they can also contact myself and my colleague Asma to kind of get some advice on that as well, so they're not left out on a limb. So and then also just a kind of disclaimer, or to mention that in addition to this, it's something that I've been very passionate about. So I've written some books that actually came out last week, the week before. So there is also this workbook and guide that is a useful resource to recommend to parents as well, if they want to kind of do it in more depth at home, or if in school you wanted to do kind of a series of sessions, because in this, the guidebook that goes alongside the workbook here breaks down how you can use the workbook with a young person over a series of sessions. So you could use it over like 6 to 8 sessions. So again, it could be a useful resource whether you've got an adult who's available to work one-to-one with a child, or if you would like to signpost to parents. So I just thought I'd mention that as well. So one of the analogies that I use when I'm talking about neurodiversity and autism is this kind of image of pens and pencils. So we'd often compare pens and pencils, maybe write a list of why you might use a pen, why you might use a pencil. So thinking about exams, obviously a pen is more suitable, and writing forms and things, but then for art lessons, maths, if you're doing specific drawings, it's more useful to use a pen. So they're very similar, but they have slightly different strengths and things that they're better at than others. So you can compare this to pens being neurodivergent people, so those who might be autistic, ADHD, etc., and pencils being neurotypical people. So both are good at what they do. There isn't only one pen. So if you're looking at the pens and pencils in this picture like a class of people, sometimes the young person feels like they're the only person who's different from everybody else, but they're not. And there's going to be multiple other young people in their schools that are also neurodivergent. The pens or neurodivergent people may be different to the pencils or neurotypical people, but the pens, neurodivergent people, share similarities. So you might, if somebody else is autistic or is neurodivergent, you might share similarities to them, and again, this is part of why knowing about your autistic identity helps with self-esteem later in life, is because you then often find a kind of group of people, whether it's online or in schools or in social clubs, and meeting other autistic young people is again very kind of affirming for the young person's identity, because again, they don't feel like they're completely on their own. And you're not the only one who feels like a pen in a class of pencils. In fact, about 1 in 7 people are neurodivergent. This statistic keeps changing. I read something the other day saying 1 in 5. I was doing some training the other day because the current English statistics around autism is 1 in 100. The latest American is 1 in 44, but somebody the other day mentioned 1 in 38. So it's, as each time sort of research is done, the rates of kind of an autism identification are becoming more sort of frequent. So just a quote here from a young person from a Sutton school, actually, talking about how he likes to be different. So I'll just leave you to read that for a second. And again, it's just a kind of, the whole process of this, I try to make very positive for the young person. I or the ELSA, if they're delivering these sessions, would go through what the autism identification process is looking for. So when a young person is being assessed for autism, the practitioner will go through these kind of areas. They look at it from the DSM-5, which is a diagnostic manual. So it's the wording slightly less kind of neurodiversity affirming, I guess. But this is essentially the traits they're looking at. This is something I find quite useful if I'm talking to a parent or somebody who's saying, oh, I think my child might be autistic. I can say, well, let's go through these points, you know, how it relates to each of those areas. So this can be a useful kind of visual, again, to refer back to. Terminology, I know we talked about way back when we started these sessions, but I know we've got a few new people as well. So just a reminder of the terminology to refer to and to be wary of, particularly around school, but also when if you're talking to a young person about their autistic identity. And you don't have to be having formal sessions with a young person to talk about it. It might be that if you're, you know, their form tutor or their year leader, you might have times when you kind of meet with them on a one-to-one basis, possibly, or informally you do so, and these conversations might come up. So it's just useful to be aware of those language patterns. So a reminder that autism is preferred from ASD, because ASD stands for autism spectrum disorder, and disorder's got negative connotations. To be told you're disordered. Research found that the general consensus was preference for autistic person rather than person with autism. Neurotypical is the word to refer to people who are not autistic, not ADHD, not dyslexic, who have this kind of average way of thinking, really. Sometimes it's referred to as neuro average as well. And rather than referring to high or low functioning, it's better to talk about varying support needs. So you might say that somebody who's in a specialist school in the borough might have higher support needs within the school setting. But obviously the support needs will vary depending on what that activity is. They might have very low support needs when they're on the trampoline or doing something that they are very passionate and about and find easier. So I'm just going to share a little bit of this clip about monotropism, which is a theory of autism that is now seen as kind of one of the most useful ones to understand autism as a whole. Previously, there were theories around sort of lack of empathy and those kind of things, which over time have not been that helpful or not always that positive. But this is a theory that's kind of more accepted as well by the autistic community. So I'm going to play a little bit of this and then explain it in a bit more detail. Give me a shout if there's a problem with sound at all.
Monotropism is a theory about how the flow of our attention differs between autistic and neurotypical minds. Our attention is a finite resource. There's only so many things we can concentrate on before we start to make mistakes. The way we distribute our attention influences how we perform tasks, how we learn, how we mix with other people, and even how we attend to basic needs. According to the theory of monotropism, the average neurotypical mind allocates significant attention to our surroundings, to the people nearby, and to thoughts and plans unrelated to our current situation. On top of our main focus, there are hazards to watch out for, people we may want to respond to, physical needs like hunger and fatigue, emotional states, and plans for what we may do next, say next, or eat for dinner. If we had, for argument's sake, 10 attention points to spend at any given time, 5 might be addressed to the task at hand, and the remaining 5 distributed amongst everything else. The monotropic mind allocates its resources very differently though. 8 or 9 of those 10 points are dedicated to the task, leaving only 1 or 2 to other possibilities. When our attention is all on one thing, it gathers a force of its own, a mental momentum if you like, and this makes it hard to change direction. We can't just drop everything and change tack when we're asked to, because there's so much mental force propelling us in one direction. If someone tries to talk to us or our stomach starts rumbling, we're not only less likely to notice, it may take us a lot longer to react and to work out how to respond when we do. We have to slow down before we can start peeling away attention points to allocate to the new task, and that takes time and effort. Say I'm talking to my friend Jeffrey in a coffee shop. We're chatting away about a story in the news, but then some of Jeffrey's other friends, Rod, Jane and Freddie, walk in and say hello to Jeffrey. With a neurotypical attention focus, I'd be wired to smoothly switch over to the new social situation. Instead of an intense one-on-one conversation with my friend, I'd shift to meeting new people mode. Rod comes over and instead of joining in to talk about the news, he asks if we saw the football last night. So now I'm shifting gear again, not only incorporating more people into my flow, but a new subject. Then Jane and Freddie sit down too and start looking at the snack menu and asking if the food here is any good, so the conversation moves in yet another direction. I'm constantly moving my attention from Jeffrey to his friends and back again. What started as 2 friends talking about one subject has transformed into a social gathering, with the chat shifting between multiple topics. And because these people are new to me, I'm sizing them up too, judging whether or not I like them and want them to become my friends eventually. Rod?
Okay, so the theory of monotropism is very relevant to young people in schools because our school environments shift so quickly. So if you imagine a young person in an English lesson, they might be writing an essay or answering a question. The bell goes, it's on to the next lesson, everyone rushes off. But they're still in that zone. And as you can see here on the picture on the left, with the 1 arrow for interest, it's a lot thicker, which is representing that the level of sort of focus for that interest is much more intense. For the polytropic brain, they can focus on lots of different things. So you might be in the staff room at the end of the day, or in your classroom doing some marking, for example, and you might notice that you're hungry and have a snack. You might wonder what you've got ready for dinner tonight. You might notice you're hot and take your cardigan off. You might say goodbye to somebody as they walk past and then come back to the marking. So your brain might be able to flit from one thing to another, but with less depth to your focus. So this is also a strength for people who have monotropic ways of thinking, because they tend to have much more depth to that focus. But it just might mean that the focus at that time may not match what is desired by the teacher, for example. So this is where it can get tricky, because we don't always give our pupils enough time to shift their attention. So they said in that video, kind of need to stop and like peel back the layers of what you were doing before you can then shift onto what you now need to do. And autistic individuals have also said about the importance of trying to incorporate their main focus or interest into whatever it is you're doing. And this can sound really tricky, because if you're having, if the interest's dinosaurs and you're having an English lesson and you're doing I don't know, Charles Dickens or something, it might seem completely irrelevant. But there can be ways of just even discreetly doing it. So I know a student in the 6th form was saying how he was doing a lesson and there was a picture of a dinosaur on this worksheet he was doing, and it was loosely linked to the topic, but it wasn't really. I think it was about evolution. But it completely grabbed his attention, and because he kind of seen it linked in a way, he was then really focused on the lesson, even though it was nothing to do with dinosaurs. So it's trying to think if there's ways of incorporating that as well in your lessons with your students, even if it's just, you know, that thing that young person's passionate about, and you have a quick word at the start of the lesson. Perhaps you could link it back to, you know, a time in history that then linked to Charles Dickens, you know, some way of just making it a very kind of vague link. But the other thing as well to be aware of is, like he mentioned in there, if his stomach rumbles and he's focused on something else, he may not register that feeling of hunger in his body, which links back to the work. I think it was the last session you had on sensory, or that might have been the one that was postponed. I can't remember now. I know one of them, I think it is the one actually that you've got in the summer. But that understanding of interoception and that their sense internally, and how that you understand the messages coming from your body to know if you're hungry, if you're hot, if you need the toilet, etc. So a lot of autistic people will say that if they're focused on one thing intensely, they won't notice that they're hungry or that they need the toilet until they finish that thing. And it could then be 11 o'clock at night, for example. So this is why it's also useful to be aware of your autistic students and what they're eating in school. So I know some schools I work with will keep tabs on their like canteen orders and to check that they are actually eating things. Because it might be that if they're not registering hunger, that's not really a priority for them. But obviously basic things like that, kind of, if you think back to the whole hierarchy of needs, if we're not getting our basic needs met, like water and food, it's then pretty hard to be able to concentrate in school. So this is something that I share as well in the training for the ELSAs to understand autism. And you might think, oh, I've got loads of stuff to do, you know, we don't have time to do that. This is just a quote from a parent to highlight the importance of having time to talk about the autism for the young person. So I'll just leave you for a minute or so to read that. And you might be able to recognize that because there's a combination, I think, of us not talking about autism with young people because we're worried we're going to say the wrong thing, or we don't know if they know that they're autistic, or that they might not want it mentioned in front of peers, etc. So we do need to be sensitive around it, but we do need to provide young people with this, key information, really, because especially as we know, we've talked in the past about the really poor rates of employment for autistic adults. Some of that is to do with autistic adults not being aware of their own needs and being able to self-advocate and ask for what they need and those reasonable adjustments. Obviously, a big chunk is also to do with workplaces not being as autism friendly as they should be. But if there was a combination of the two, things might be a bit smoother. So in the sessions that will be available, or the training that's available, it's talking about what autism is, an understanding of what autism means to the young person, their autistic identity, trying to give a positive sense of self, but also an acknowledgement that things may be trickier. So it's not kind of, all airy-fairy, but we do want an overall positive message and a pride in being autistic. And some people ask, when are children ready? So for you guys at secondary, generally in terms of age, they probably are ready, but you do want to check that, for a start, parents are ready. that they consent to these conversations taking place, because the child or young person may go home and have questions that they ask at home. And if parents kind of haven't got in the right headspace or got their own heads around it, they may not be supporting that conversation in a positive way. The young person should be ready to share attention. I might need some support to do this, but be able to kind of reflect on difference generally and discuss these concepts, which can be quite abstract, talking about different ways of thinking. And it's key to think about how the young person's life might improve from them being more aware of their autistic identity. So the adult in this setting would be kind of a reassuring presence, not saying too much. They're sort of supporting with processing and giving examples to help the young person identify with what their diagnosis means to them. Things not to do. So somebody told me a while back to try not to use the word but in these conversations. And the reason for that was because whenever you hear but, you kind of know that it's contradicting whatever's been said before the but. So if somebody says, oh, you're autistic, but you're really good at lots of things, it kind of sounds like, is this a sort of a backhanded compliment in a way? So if you can be aware when you're having these sorts of conversations, or staff in your school, just try to be aware of when you might be saying but, and maybe if it can be replaced with and. Don't insist on eye contact. Again, secondary schools I found can be a bit obsessed with eye contact. And it's quite a balance between wanting to prepare young people to have the life skills for, interviews and preparing for adulthood, between actually kind of respecting their neurodivergence and things they might find tricky, and understanding that actually it can be painful for a lot of young people. So it's quite powerful if the young person knows that they can go into an interview, for example, and say, I probably won't look at you a lot of the time when I'm speaking, but I just wanted you to know that I find it a lot easier to concentrate if I look elsewhere. So I just don't want you to think I'm being rude, because then the other person hopefully will be quite understanding of that, and it's quite empowering. So we shouldn't insist on eye contact as well. We can teach some sort of tricks about looking, at the top of the head, at the nose, at someone's collar. So you're looking in the direction of the person speaking, but not necessarily looking in their eyes. These conversations shouldn't be rushed. So there should be time to digest the information as well. It's quite major information. Try not to put words in the young person's mouth. So if they come to you asking something or telling you something, try not to sort of rephrase it. Try and use their own words, and try not to overload them with information. I'm going to whiz through some of these because some of these are more relevant for the young people, the ELSAs who are doing the sessions. So just to give you a brief overview of the sort of resource that the ELSAs and any staff doing the training are signposted to. So the idea is you're making a booklet about the young person. So it's all about them, and it covers these sort of different points. So looking at them on the outside and the inside, in terms of physical and personality traits, to again remind ourselves that we're all different. Looking at being autistic and what that means to them, other autistic individuals, sensory differences, which play a big part, and then having a kind of autism identity statement that they can share with other people as well. As we support the ELSAs to deliver these sessions, we will also be talking about how you can adapt them, because it might be, particularly if you're in a girls' school, for example, you might find that there needs to be a bit more about anxiety or about masking, or if you're working with a lot of girls. So there's bits like that can be added in. And if I whiz through, there's kind of some slides like focusing on difference. This is about everybody being different on the outside. On the inside, looking at likes and dislikes, personality traits. So you've got different pictures there to represent different personality traits. Introducing the word autistic. Again, looking through what that actually means in terms of the different aspects. The analogy of pens and pencils, or different operating systems, referring to things like Apple and Android, to just show slightly different ways of doing things that are equally good. A reminder that they're not the only person who's autistic, and it's not an illness, it's not something that goes away. There's then the option to cover lots of different autistic individuals. I wouldn't cover all of these with one person. I'd pick out the ones that are relevant. So I'll whiz through, I think we've covered some of these in the past. And again, I'll send you these slides if you want to refer to any of these. So you've got actors, TV presenters, models, swimmers, so sports people, artists, looking back in history at people that may have been autistic, activists, an actor again, an author, professors, motorcycle racer. So again, you can see here there's lots of different people with different interests, which is key, because sometimes we have that perception of autism looking, like one particular thing. So then a big section is for the young person to go through the kind of key traits related to autism with an adult, to put in their own words what it means to them. So in this section, I would say some autistic people are very sensitive to sounds and might find it difficult when there's loud noises going on, in the hall, for example. Does that sound like it's relevant to you? And they might say, oh yeah, I really struggle with X, Y, and Z. Or they might say, no, not really. And you can just leave that one blank. So there's a template here where there's all the sort of different traits related to, well, some of the traits, positive, and some things they might find trickier, where comments can be written alongside them. And then a whole section on sensory, which I haven't included the whole thing because it goes into a lot of detail, but there's opportunities to explore what the senses are, how they work, so the whole sensory processing as the senses go to the brain and we choose a suitable response, unpicking senses that they like and dislike, and also then having strategies to support with that. And there's a whole bank of possible strategies that the young person might want to try out, such as these ones. And then this autism headline. So understanding it means you're good at certain things and find certain things trickier. This is quite key because probably even more so in secondary, when you have things like Autism Week or Neurodiversity Week, other students might ask, well, what does that actually mean if you're saying you're autistic? I've had some students who have announced that they're autistic after reading certain books in their classes and things, which is great because they're proud to share that. But you want them then to be able to explain that if they're questioned on, what does that actually mean for you? So having a kind of go-to statement or a headline can be helpful. So it could be saying, I'm good at certain things, I find other things trickier. So for some young people, this is something like, I'm good at working on my own, I find it trickier when I have to speak to new people. Something that kind of explains a bit of the sensory or social aspects. And then the booklet finishes with toolkits of things that might help. So this can kind of tie in with IEP. I do find going through this process can be a really useful information gathering tool. So particularly in that section where there's the pictures, young people might share things that they haven't shared before, even with parents. So it can be quite eye-opening. And it can also give you useful information that can be added to things like IEPs in schools, or pupil passports and things like that. So, oh yes, after the session. So if you did have young people in school, and it probably would be that the SENCO would flag up young people that might access this support in school. But it might be that you've had a young person in your class possibly that has had some support, but that's not the end of the conversation. So it's thinking about, Can you help signpost them to other resources? Can you do things like I said about reading certain books as a whole class, so that you're helping everybody to understand, but also for them to feel seen, I guess, in school. And we do provide a resource list as well for schools to share with parents and with other staff as well, to signpost to like YouTube videos and things like that, to help for the young person to have this as an ongoing process. And there's just mine and Asma's email addresses. So Asma is a new staff member to Cognos who's doing a little bit of autism work. She's only doing a day and a half a week, but she is going to be supporting with these particular sessions. So if you go away and you think we don't have anybody in school that could do this, but then a month later you think, oh, maybe so and so could, we have recorded the training for the ELSAs, so somebody could access that at any point, and they could also attend the follow-up sessions as well, if they wanted to problem solve, etc. So you may already know you've got somebody in school that's going to do the training, or you may be thinking about it. The training for current ELSAs, so if you've already got an ELSA trained in your school, the training's next Monday, the 13th, at the Chaucer Centre from 1 till 3. Anybody who's currently training to be an ELSA, so doing the current training programme through, this is all through Cognos, the Educational Psychology Service there. So if you've got EPs trained, ELSAs trained elsewhere, they wouldn't be accessing this. Any new ELSAs accessing training, it'll be part of their training programme. So that's just reminding me of something I need to write down. So they will also be accessing this as they go forward with their training. So before I go on to Autism Week, any questions about any of that stuff in terms of supporting young people to understand a diagnosis, things to say, the ELSA specific training? Feel free to shout out or put in the chat. No? I'll keep an eye on the chat if anything comes in later on. So going on to Autism Week. Autism Week is the last week before the Easter holidays, so the week of the 27th of March. It's an initiative by the National Autistic Society. They also try and make it as a fundraising event for their charity. The resources and information I'm sharing is all about increasing autism understanding. So we don't have a focus on fundraising in Sutton. But obviously, if you as a school would like to fundraise, I know that the Sutton branch of the National Autistic Society would definitely welcome donations, but you don't have to. The focus is more on increasing understanding. And they've called it National Autism Acceptance Week because they found that in the past it was called Autism Awareness Week. And they've said now that people generally in society are aware of autism, but they don't necessarily accept it. And we've had discussions in Sutton about what to call the weeks. And we had previously wanted to call it as Autism Celebration Week, again, focusing on those sort of strengths and autism pride. But as a society, we're not quite there yet in terms of people aren't being accepted for their differences. So that's why that's the kind of name of the week. But in Sutton, I'll just show you part of the timetable for the week. We have got talks on every day, and there's a mixture of who they're aimed at. So some are aimed at parents, carers, some at professionals, which can be anybody really in your school setting, but it also could be social care, etc. There's some for young people, and then there's some that are relevant for a mixture of audiences. We have got things on autism and bullying, sensory impact, mental health, autism education and employment would be an interesting one because it's from a young person, well, young adult, with his own lived experience of being autistic, and his sort of struggles through education and getting jobs. There's advice sessions a whole day on Thursday the 30th. So you could signpost parents to sign up for a slot, or you could come along yourself if you've got like specific young people you'd like to talk about. There's lots of different talks on. So in a moment, I'm going to send you all the information through on that. I also wanted to share a kind of event or exhibition that we're hoping to run. So over the next sort of 3 or 4 weeks, if you've got autistic young people, maybe who quite like art or able to express themselves, who want to submit artwork that expresses who they are and what autism means to them. So the artwork should have a focus on autism and have a quote alongside it. So maybe a statement around what autism means for them. We would like to be able to display some of these in Sutton Library after Autism Week. So the closing date is the last date before the Easter holidays, the 31st of March, because we thought that some schools might want to do things in school related to this, and also just to give a bit more time for young people if they'd like to work on that. We are wanting work from autistic young people, so or I guess those who are potentially autistic, but they'd need to be able to reflect on what autism means to them. So they probably should be on the diagnostic route, really. So that's, again, just to flag that up as an activity as well for young people. So in a moment, I'm going to send you this information all via email and give you a bit of time to start sharing that within your schools. It was sent this morning to all Senkos, but it'd be great if I can send it to you, because you can then start sharing it as well. Maybe print it out, stick it up in staff room, give a reminder to people, because there's some great talks. Any online ones we will be recording. We've tried to have a mixture of time so that there are ones after school and early evening, so that parents can attend as well, and class teachers. So I will pass that on to you in a moment. And I also wanted to flag up this programme that's been on BBC over the last couple of weeks, that's now available on iPlayer, called Inside Our Autistic Minds, which some of you may have seen. It's a 2-part series. It's very well done because it's sort of led by autistic individuals, and it covers kind of a range of support needs. So you've got young people or young adults who are non-speaking. You've got some who have spent years masking and were diagnosed a lot later in life. So it really covers lots of different people's stories. And to be honest, from watching it, I think it's really good, like CPD just on its own. So I'll also send you the links for that, because if you could get all of if everybody in schools watched these 2 programs, I think that would probably increase sort of autism understanding and acceptance quite a bit just in schools. So, and it's free, and you can watch it anytime. So useful free resource there as well. So what I'm going to do coming off of here is send you an email with all the resources for Autism Week. And I'll probably send separately that video, because you might want to send it to different people. And I'd like you to make sure that by the end of the day today, at least somebody has been sent that information, whether you send it to your, I don't know, it's different names in different schools, but the people that has kind of contact with parents, they can get sent out to all parents on our mailing list. Send it out to all teachers so that they can all have access to the free CPD, because there's some really useful events for that week. And I'll also send you the information again about the ELSA training to make sure that that hasn't been missed by any of your schools. I'm going to quickly take a screenshot to just check I have got all your email addresses for everyone that's here. Any questions before? You're going to have sort of 13 minutes, not spare time. It's time to act on the email and make sure you start sharing it with other people. But before I do that, has anybody got any questions? Anything they wanted to ask in the chat? No? Okay, so I'm going to get that already. The email should be coming through in the next few minutes. So be patient if it doesn't appear straight away. But I hope that was useful. And please get sharing, because that is a key part of this role, is to make sure that information doesn't stop at you, that it gets shared across your schools as well. And any questions, if you think of them afterwards, please let me know as well, and you can just ping me an email in response. Otherwise, hope you have a lovely rest of the day and week. I have, just to say, in relation to that, the books as well that I mentioned, we are having a launch event on Thursday evening at Wellington Boys. So if you did want to find out more about the event, about the book, let me know, because I can send you that information too. Yes, I can send the PowerPoint, and the events are available. Yeah, each one, it very clearly will say who it's for, where it is, etc. So it will be labelled if it's for parents, if it's for professionals, etc. And there's some that are the same topic, but they're separated. So there's a sensory one for professionals and a sensory one for parents. Right, I'll end this so I can send that to you ASAP. And I hope that was useful. Thanks for those comments, and I will send that through to you now. Take care.